The desert wind screamed like a warning. It carried the scent of scorched earth and silence, the kind of silence that feels heavier than 100 voices. Beyond the main road of this nameless dying town stood a crooked metal cage, rust bleeding into its bars like the town's own guilt. Inside sat a boy, barefoot, mute, giant. His eyes were dark and unreadable, but they didn't flicker with rage, only weariness. The townsfolk called him the Beast. They spat as they passed him, threw food near him, but never close enough for him to grab without crawling. Some claimed he killed a man with his bare hands. Others whispered that he came from a place where no child should have survived. Whatever the truth, the town didn't want it. Truth was inconvenient. Fear was easier. And so the boy remained, caged, alone, a spectacle, a punishment. Most folks believed the cage was for safety, but there was one man riding in from the hills who saw it differently. He didn't wear silver. His boots didn't shine. He didn't speak loud or swing a gun to earn respect. He was quiet, observant, and his hat-shaded eyes that had seen too many good things go bad. The cowboy rode into town without fanfare. His horse, a dust-colored mare with a limp, mirrored the man's own worn spirit. Nobody greeted them. Nobody asked his name. And yet, the moment he passed the cage, he stopped, dead still. He looked, really looked. The boy stared back, unblinking, no flinch, no threat, just a stillness that held something ancient, something broken. And the cowboy whispered, low and soft, "Who did this to you?" The boy didn't answer, maybe couldn't, but the wind carried something, not a voice, not a sound, a weight, a memory. The cowboy turned to the nearest shopkeep, a crooked man with a face like a baked potato and a heart just as rotten. "That boy got a price?" the cowboy asked. The shopkeep sneered. "You planning to buy yourself a monster?" The cowboy didn't blink. "Number, I'm buying a boy, one you forgot was human." The deal was made quietly, no ceremony, no crowd. Just a few whispered words between the cowboy and the shopkeep, who counted the coins like he was touching poison. The townsfolk didn't believe it at first, that someone would actually buy the boy, not to punish him, not to exhibit him, but to free him. The cowboy walked to the cage, keys rattled in his hand, rust bit at the lock like it didn't want to let go, and when the door swung open for the first time in years, the entire town seemed to hold its breath. The boy didn't move. "Come with me," the cowboy said, his voice still like nightfall. The boy blinked slowly, his massive frame coiled with uncertainty. Fear wasn't easy to unlearn. The cowboy didn't force him, just turned and walked away, giving the boy one choice the town had never offered: freedom without demand. For a moment, it seemed the boy wouldn't go, but then he stood and followed. Dust kicked up around his bare feet as he walked behind the cowboy through the center of town. No one said a word, but eyes followed. The bartender froze mid-pour. The preacher's wife clutched her pearl necklace like it had moral weight. Children peeked through curtains, mouths agape. He was taller than any man in town, stronger, but he never lifted his fists, just walked quietly, one step behind the cowboy, as if unsure how far he was allowed to go. The cowboy led him out to the edge of town, to a battered little shack, barely held together by nails and prayers. It had one bed, one broken chair, and a porch that leaned like it needed rest. "This is home for now," the cowboy said. The boy looked at it like a dream. "You're not owned," the cowboy added. "You're not caged. You're just here." The boy didn't respond, not with words, but he sat down on the porch beside the broken chair. Not in it, just beside it. It was the first time he'd ever chosen where to sit. That night, the stars came out sharp and wild. Inside the shack, the cowboy cooked beans and set the pot on the table. He didn't eat until the boy picked up the spoon. The silence between them wasn't hollow. It was rich. Respect lived there. And somewhere deep inside the boy, a question stirred. What does it mean to belong? The sun rose angry. Orange light bathed the town in fire, stretching long shadows across crooked buildings and hearts even more misshapen. Word of the cowboy and his new companion had spread overnight like whiskey in a broken bottle. The boy was no longer in the cage, and that terrified them more than when he was. Rumors twisted like barbed wire. Some said the cowboy was a bounty hunter. Others swore he was a lunatic who fancied taming a demon. And a few whispered the old legend of Black Hollow Creek, a boy born in a storm who broke bones with a single scream. The truth? It didn't matter. What mattered was that the boy was loose. The sheriff paid a visit by noon. He knocked on the door of the shack like he was announcing the end of the world. The cowboy opened it calmly, nodding like he expected trouble dressed in a tin badge. "You know what you done?" the sheriff asked, eyes narrowed beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "I freed a boy," the cowboy replied. "Freed a threat," the sheriff corrected. "People are scared." The cowboy looked past him at the townsfolk gathering like buzzards beyond the cactus line. "Funny," he muttered. "They weren't scared when he was starving behind bars. They weren't scared when they threw rocks. Just scared now, when he has dignity." The sheriff's jaw tightened. Dignity won't stop a riot. From inside the shack, the boy stepped forward. He didn't growl or glare, just stood. His scar caught the light like lightning caught glass. He looked the sheriff dead in the eye, and then gently placed a battered, hand-carved wooden horse on the porch rail. One he'd made last night while the cowboy slept. It was imperfect, but it was proof. Proof of care, of intention, of something human. The sheriff faltered. He didn't apologize, didn't back down, but he left. And as he did, the cowboy leaned over and whispered to the boy, "They'll keep testing you, wanting to prove their fears right." The boy nodded once, and though he still hadn't spoken a word, the cowboy felt the strength of that silence. Later that week, the cowboy brought the boy to the market. The crowd parted like God himself had split the dirt. Shopkeepers dropped their prices low, hoping the cowboy wouldn't stop near their stalls. Mothers grabbed their children's arms with the urgency reserved for fire alarms. No one spoke to the boy until a tiny voice cut through the whispers. "Hi!" A girl, no older than 6, peered up with sunburned cheeks and wild curls. She held out a flower, a crooked daisy she'd pulled from a crack in the sidewalk. "You're very tall," she added, smiling with her whole soul. The boy crouched, eyes wide. Carefully, with fingers thick as fence posts, he took the flower. A petal fell, but the moment held. It was the first time someone had smiled at him, not for spectacle, not in sarcasm, just because they saw a person. That night, back at the shack, the cowboy sat on the porch, whittling. "Some people see what they fear," he said softly. "Some see what they hope." The boy watched him carve, and then slowly reached for a piece of wood himself, not to defend, not to build a cage, but to create. He didn't need words, not yet. because in that quiet shared night, with stars punching holes in the darkness, he and the cowboy built something stronger than walls. They built trust. The cowboy woke to silence, but not the peaceful kind. It was the kind that sat heavy on your chest, like a warning before thunder. Outside the shack, the boy stood barefoot in the red dust, staring off into the horizon. He hadn't moved all night, just stood there, watching. The cowboy stepped outside, boots crunching gravel. "What do you see?" he asked. The boy didn't answer, but far in the distance a dust trail twisted up like smoke. A rider, and not just any rider. The cowboy's hand drifted to his holster, not out of habit, but instinct. The rider moved like a shadow, loose in posture, but tight in purpose. A pale horse, a coat that looked like dried blood, and a face half covered with cloth, like even the sun wasn't allowed to know it. When he arrived, he didn't dismount. He just stared at the boy. And then he said the name no one had spoken in years. Levi. The cowboy froze. It wasn't the stranger's voice that hit him, it was the boy's response. A blink, a breath, then a whisper. A word the cowboy had never heard come from the boy's lips. Pa? The world shifted. The stranger stepped down, boots sinking into the dirt. "Been looking for you," he said, "since the fire, since your mama—" The boy's eyes trembled, but the rest of him stayed solid, like he'd practiced being stoned for too long. The cowboy stepped between them. "You his kin?" he asked, cautious. The stranger laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "I made him. That don't mean I raised him." And there it was. The cowboy saw the truth. This wasn't a father. This was a wound shaped like a man. Back inside the shack, the cowboy tried to ask questions, tried to fill in the jagged edges of the boy's past. But Levi, yes, Levi, the name finally had weight, just stared at the flame of the lantern like it might answer for him. Bits emerged, a fire, screams, a cabin deep in the valley burned out by debt collectors who didn't care that a family lived there, a child who survived, a man who ran. Levi had clawed his way out of ash and pain, found the town. They didn't take him in, they locked him up. No one knew, no one asked, until now. The stranger returned the next day with two others. One had eyes like steel traps and fingers that curled like they'd never held anything gently. The other wore a preacher's coat, but had the soul of a snake. They didn't come to claim Levi out of love. They came because someone told them about the strength, how the boy moved crates like they were feathers, how he bent iron once when frightened. They wanted to take him and use him. The cowboy stood on the porch, rifle in hand. "He stays," he said. The stranger smiled. "We'll see." And just like that, the quiet days ended. Trouble had arrived, and Levi's past wasn't done with him yet. The cowboy didn't sleep that night. He sat by the shack window, eyes tracking every crunch of gravel, every breeze that dared whisper past the brush. Inside, Levi slept on the floor, his scar turned away from the light as if hiding from dreams. The flower from the little girl had wilted on the table, but Levi had kept it anyway. He was changing, but the world wasn't ready. At sunrise, the strangers returned. This time they didn't knock. They rolled up with horses that had seen violence. Guns hung low at their sides. The stranger, who called himself Levi's pa, didn't smile. He commanded, "Send the boy out. We've got work needs doing." The cowboy stepped out slowly, rifle in hand, but not aimed. He didn't need the threat. He had something stronger. Presence. "You're not taking him," he said. The others dismounted. Tension rippled. One reached for the butt of his pistol. Levi stepped out then, unarmed, barefoot, towering, but calm. "You told me once I had fire in me," he said. His voice was gravel, unused but powerful. "I kept it buried so long it started burning me from the inside." The stranger laughed. "So speaking now means you a man?" "No," Levi replied. "It means I ain't yours any more." And just like that, the line was drawn. They didn't fight. Not then. Instead, the strangers left with promises. "We'll be back," the preacher coat man hissed. "Your little cowboy can't protect you from everyone. When men want power, they take it." The cowboy didn't flinch. "We ain't hiding," he said. That day, Levi barely spoke, but he worked with purpose. He repaired the porch, helped an old widow down the road fix her leaking roof. When children passed, he waved. One brave boy tossed him a drawing, a stick figure with big arms and a happy face. Levi taped it to the wall of the shack, and for the first time since arriving, he smiled. But night always brings shadows. The strangers weren't bluffing. They came back under cover of darkness, 6 this time. Guns, chains, fire. One lit a torch and hurled it at the shack, shouting, "Let's see what kind of monster you are when it burns." Flames roared. The cowboy fired once, a warning shot. One of the men flinched. Another raised his gun. Levi didn't run. He grabbed a nearby water barrel and dashed it over the flames. Then, using nothing but strength and instinct, he lifted the flaming porch beam and flung it aside like driftwood. Smoke filled the air, screams. But Levi stood tall, not angry, not wild, just ready. The strangers fled, not because of violence, but because Levi didn't give them what they wanted. No rage, no monster, only defiance with dignity. After the fire was put out, the cowboy and Levi sat on the edge of the burned porch, breathing in the night. "They'll come back," Levi said quietly. "I know," the cowboy replied. Levi stared at the horizon, no longer a boy waiting in a cage. "I ain't afraid any more." The cowboy looked at him, eyes soft beneath that worn brim. "Good," he said. "Now let's give 'em something worth fearing." Smoke still lingered in the air, not thick, not choking, just a whisper of last night's fire clinging to the wood like memory. The shack bore new scars, but inside something unexpected had begun to grow. Purpose. Levi stood early, hands covered in ash and blistered from the heat, yet he didn't rest. He built. Boards replaced beams. The porch was straighter than before, every nail driven not just to fix damage, but to stake a claim. "I live here," Levi whispered to himself, "not as a beast, not as a prisoner, as a man." The cowboy watched quietly from inside, sipping coffee with that same stoic calm. But there was pride in his gaze, quiet, unspoken, profound. That day, Levi didn't just work on the shack. He stepped into town alone. At first, the streets cleared like water around a rock. People parted, nervous glances pinging between shutters and windows. The sheriff stood by his office, arms folded, waiting. But Levi didn't flinch. He walked to the carpenter's shop and offered help. Moved heavy wood, carried beams, repaired splintered rails. Said nothing, but smiled when handed a rag to clean his hands. Then the blacksmith, then the livery. One by one, jobs were done, and one by one, eyes began to shift. Not everyone thawed. Some remained stubborn, clutching fear like it paid rent. But the younger ones, the ones who hadn't grown up steeped in hate, they saw something different. Levi wasn't just big. He wasn't just strong. He was good. That night, the cowboy sat on the porch, watching Levi sketch in a notebook. Crude drawings, houses, horses, a sun that looked more like a fried egg. "You draw like a drunk rattlesnake," the cowboy muttered. Levi smirked. "Didn't know rattlesnakes drank." "You haven't met mine," the cowboy replied. Laughter, light. It was brief, but it changed everything. But peace can't grow without shaking roots. A woman came to the shack at dusk, older, wrapped in layers of linen, eyes sharp with secrets. She didn't smile. "You don't remember me," she said to the cowboy. He frowned, then stood. Levi watched carefully. "You used to ride under Marshal Colburn," she continued, "back before the badges meant blood." The cowboy stiffened. "You were the one they called the Ghost, the one who vanished after the massacre." Levi looked at him confused. "Is it true?" he asked. The cowboy didn't answer. The woman spoke again. "That boy's life matters, but yours? Yours brings danger." She handed Levi a folded paper, a wanted poster, faded, torn, with a cowboy's face on it. "Charges, desertion, murder, treason." Levi stared. The cowboy took the paper slowly, eyes unreadable. "That name's dead," he said. "That man died with the others. All that's left is this, a tired fool trying to make right." Silence settled like snow. Then Levi spoke. "You gave me a choice. I'm giving you mine." He ripped the poster in half. "We move forward." But a storm wasn't done brewing. The preacher coat man returned, alone this time. He walked into the saloon, ordered whiskey, then stood on a table and called for attention. "Y'all see a town healin'," he growled. "But healin' from what? From kindness? Number from fear? Fear you shoved behind curtains?" He held up a picture. Levi, from the cage days. "This boy ain't born of grace. He's born of chaos. And if you let chaos roam free, soon it'll eat your children." A few heads nodded, but one didn't. A young boy stepped forward, the same one who drew Levi as a stick-figure hero. "My pa says monsters live in cages," he said, "but Mr. Levi helps build houses." Silence. Then whispers. And as the preacher was shouted down by parents, ranch hands, and even the sheriff himself, a new story began to form. The wind carried a different kind of silence that morning, not the hollow stillness of a forgotten town, but the thick tension before something breaks. People moved slower. Eyes darted faster. Even the horses pawed at the dirt as if trying to warn their riders. Levi could feel it. He stood outside the shack, hands calloused, eyes sharper than before. In the past few weeks, he had rebuilt more than buildings. He had reshaped the town's soul. Children smiled at him. Old men nodded respectfully. The sheriff had even asked him to help reinforce the jail bars, not because he was dangerous, but because he understood metal better than any man alive. But kindness rarely goes unpunished. It began with a note, tucked into the doorframe of the shack, folded with precision, sealed with wax. Levi peeled it open slowly, his scar tightening. "Be ready. Midnight. You won't survive. They're coming." No signature, no name, just warning. The cowboy read the note and gritted his teeth. "Someone's setting the table," he muttered, "and they expect you to bleed first." Levi didn't respond. He just walked to the shed and picked up the old shovel, the one he used for digging fence posts and fixing graves. Quietly, he began reinforcing the foundation of the shack with stones, not because he expected to hide, but because he wasn't planning to run. That afternoon, the preacher coat man met with the mayor behind the saloon. "He's too big," the preacher hissed. Too strong. You think a town like ours can survive if we give power to someone like him?" The mayor frowned. "He hasn't harmed anyone." "Yet," the preacher snapped. "Men like him don't need reasons. They are the reason." So the preacher offered a deal, one the mayor knew was rotten. A group of outsiders, mercenaries with no morals and lots of ammunition, would arrive at midnight. They'd handle the problem, quietly, quickly, permanently. All the mayor had to do was look the other way. The sheriff heard about it too late. He rode hard to the shack just before sunset, dust trailing his guilt. Dismounted, panting, bleeding from a scrape that looked fresh. "They're not waiting," he wheezed. "They're coming. Tonight." Levi looked at him. "What will you do?" he asked. The sheriff blinked, then looked at his badge. "Something I should have done when they locked you up. Stand beside you." As darkness fell, Levi and the cowboy prepared, not with gunpowder, not with traps. They laid buckets of water near the porch, made torches, reinforced windows, and Levi, he painted a sign on the door. "This is a home, not a battlefield." It wasn't for the attackers. It was for the town. A reminder. Midnight came like a knife. 6 men rode in, faces covered, guns ready, paid in coin and cruelty. The preacher stood behind them, cloaked in moonlight, whispering prayers meant to justify murder. The cowboy stood with rifle in hand. Levi stood beside him. No armor, no weapon, just presence. And then, from the shadows, dozens appeared. Shopkeepers, ranch hands, children holding lanterns, the sheriff, even the mayor. They didn't carry guns. They carried resolve. "This boy saved our town," the sheriff called out. "And if you want him dead, you'll have to go through every one of us." Silence. The mercenaries hesitated. They were hired to kill a monster. But all they saw was a community protecting its own. They turned. Not all. One tried to draw, quick as lightning. But Levi stepped forward, grabbed the man's wrist, and held it firm. "No more cages," he said. "No more monsters." He lowered the gun. The man dropped it, and just like that, the storm ended. As dawn painted the sky soft gold, Levi sat on the porch. Children played nearby. The sheriff laughed with the cowboy. And the preacher? He packed his things and left. Truth had won. But more than that, hope had taken root. Morning broke clean. No smoke, no riders, no whispers. Just the gentle thud of hammers as neighbors helped raise a new porch, straight, sturdy, and built by many hands. The little girl brought a fresh daisy. Levi planted it by the steps. The sheriff came by with a telegram and a quiet nod. "Old warrants tossed," he said to the cowboy. "Ghosts don't hold law around here anymore." The cowboy only tipped his hat, like laying a burden down. By noon, the man in the dried blood coat appeared one last time at the edge of town. He watched Levi from the saddle, pride and hunger warring in his eyes. Levi stepped forward, calm. "I don't hate you," he said, "but I don't belong to you." The man turned his horse and vanished into heat. That evening, the town held a supper under slung lanterns. Children ran circles around Levi's legs. The mayor stood, cleared his throat, and simply said, "Thank you." No speeches, no applause, just hands passing bread and a long, healing silence. On the porch, the cowboy set a small box on the table. Inside, boots, sturdy and new. "For where you're headed," he said. Levi laced them slow, then looked up and finally let the truth sit easy in his chest. "My name is Levi," he said, "and I'm home." The stars came on like old friends. The cowboy leaned back, brim low, the weight gone from his shoulders. Levi rested a stick figure drawn above the door next to the daisy. Two outcasts looked at what they'd built, a house, a town, a family, and knew it would hold. "Come with me," the cowboy had said the day he opened the cage. Now Levi smiled at him across the porch light and returned the words, steady and sure. "Come with me," he echoed, and together they stepped inside.